a lot of refugees are supported by children. They are unaccompanied minors.
Rohingya people have left and they displaced to various countries with no access to education, to medical care, to employment, to the labor market.
I would say that there is also a need to think about different creative ways to think about asylum, or whether or not community sponsorship is a way to alleviate some of the government's or like institutional stress, pressure.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Picture this: a loud noise wakes you up. It could be the deafening sound of a missile exploding, or perhaps a knock on your door by soldiers who are targeting your family because of your identity and beliefs. The exact sounds may vary, but you know it means one thing: your life's at risk. Now, nothing is certain except for uncertainty itself. Every day might be your last day. How long would you be able to carry on like this? And more importantly, how long will it take until you decide to flee, no matter how dangerous the journey, to find safety for yourself and your loved ones? Now, before we continue, I want you to know that this was written by my producer, who is from Ukraine. To help us today to understand the reasons why more and more people every year are being displaced, we're joined here in Taipei by Chunyuan Hu, initiator of Refugee 101 Taiwan and co-founder of Refugee Path, and Josh Hong, a Kuala Lumpur-based freelance writer who spent years serving at the United Nations Refugee Agency, working on refugee and migration-related issues. Thank you both very much for being part of this very important conversation. I want to start with you, Josh, first. Give us a little bit more background about your work with refugees.
Thanks for having me. I started working with the UN Refugee Agencies almost like 20 years ago. At the time, there was this Aceh crisis happening in Indonesia, and we did have a good number of Acehese asylum seekers and refugees. And then we also had a large number of refugees, including Rohingya and Chins from Myanmar, because of the military dictatorship. So that was how my refugee work started. And over the years, whether in Malaysia, in Thailand, in Indonesia, I came into contact with thousands of refugees from the region and also beyond Southeast Asia, from Afghanistan, Iraq, and all that. And these people were actually compelled to leave their home countries due to persecution, whether on religious or ethnic, or racial ground or political opinion. And, basically they fulfill the definition of the 1951 Refugee Convention and recognized as refugee as such. Malaysia is located strategically in the middle of Southeast Asia that tends to attract, if I may use the word, refugees from neighboring countries beset with a host of political, religious conflicts and all that.
Right, and unfortunately that happens in many countries across the world that do take in refugees. Chunyuan, tell us about Refugee 101 Taiwan and Refugee Path and the work you do.
I started Refugee 101 Taiwan to raise awareness of global refugee issues and advocate for refugee law. In Taiwan, currently there is none, so I really hope to bring my experience to Taiwanese people, just to let people know who refugees are, what kind of challenges they encounter, and what kind of different ways that we can offer asylum, just bring the discussions in Taiwan to Taiwanese people. So Refugee 101, I will go to schools, I will go to organizations to host workshops and talk about different issues across the world. And for Refugee Path, me and my colleague Xiaoqi would invite people, practitioners like Josh, and then people with lived experience to come and share their experience with Taiwanese people. So there are people from Yemen, from Palestine, from Singapore, from Malaysia, everywhere to talk about issues all over the world.
Now, with social media and more news stations and outlets, we're hearing more and more about refugees. But Josh, the issue of refugees is nothing new. It's something that has been going on for decades, if not centuries, in various forms. Can you give us a sense about modern day refugee flows?
In Southeast Asia, basically the region is not new to refugee flows. We used to have refugees from southern Philippines into Sabah state of Malaysia, and also Vietnamese boat people back in the 1970s and 80s. Starting in the 1990s, we started to have refugees coming from Myanmar because of the military oppression in the country and also the civil wars and all that. So currently in Malaysia, I think if I'm not mistaken, UNHCR in Malaysia has registered almost 182,000 people. Among them, over 90% of them from Myanmar, including Rohingya, whose plight is basically well known around the world. But on top of that, there are also other pockets of other ethnicities such as Chin, Kachin, and Mon, and Karen, and so on and so forth. Other than Myanmar, other refugees that you come into contact with in Malaysia include Iraqis, Palestinians, Sri Lankans, Afghans, and quite a few others from other Middle Eastern countries as well. And Malaysia is not the only one that hosts refugees in the region. There are also Thailand. There are perhaps 9 or 10 refugee camps along the Thai-Myanmar borders. And also there are urban refugees seeking asylum in Bangkok, several thousands of them. And then also in Indonesia, the UNHCR office in Indonesia also has registered a good number of refugees, but the profiles are more or less the same as those in Malaysia.
Well, as you mentioned, Josh, the Rohingya are considered the most persecuted minority in the world. They have lived for centuries in Myanmar, but have been denied citizenship since 1982. The Rohingya face systematic abuse from the government and the AA Arakan army, who are vigilante fighters in the Rakhine state where they live. Sujaudin Karimuddin left his home 25 years ago and lives in Malaysia. He founded the ILOM initiative, which provides support to Rohingya refugee communities, and he explains the terror and discrimination they face in their homeland.
The first massacre started in 1942, and then subsequently, multiple incidents has happened, and currently they are sieged. Their livelihood is very limited, and you probably already know about the travel restrictions and movement restrictions. Within 10 kilometers, you need to acquire a permit from the government. Now, what AA is doing, they're asking people to register with them. Of course, if you don't, they will be threatened to killed or kidnapped or put in their detention camps, which they call prison.
Now, Josh, you described briefly what the Rohingya face in their homeland, but can you explain a little bit more what it is that really makes them leave their homeland, flee, and leave behind everything they have?
We all know that citizenship is the first right to gain other rights. Without citizenships, one is denied of a range of other rights, such as medical care, employment, education, so on and so forth. So the Rohingyas started to be denied the Myanmar citizenship from the early 1980s, and some of them probably even lost it in the 1960s and 90s and 70s and all that. And this denial of citizenship has led to many forms of violations of human rights, including the lack of education, the prohibition on employment, and the lack of access to the labor market and even medical care. Because of these years of oppression and also the denial of citizenship, all this hardship actually prompted Rohingyas to flee to other countries, Bangladesh and Malaysia, but even as far as Saudi Arabia. And over the years, the military launched one crackdown after another against the Rohingya populations within the country in the northern part of northwestern part of Myanmar, Rakhine State, northern part of Rakhine State, and many of these places basically are now empty. Basically the Rohingya populations, Rohingya people have left, and they displaced to various countries, as I said just now. And those who remain are mostly, you can find them mostly in refugee camps or in temporary shelters, with no access to education, to medical care, to employment, to the labor market. So it's a vicious circus. Because of this, and generations of Rohingya have been fleeing the country. In the case of Malaysia, I think we can trace the arrival of Rohingyas as early as the 1970s. So we are talking about even the fourth generation of Rohingyas in Malaysia. And the fact that Malaysia is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Conventions also adds on to their plight. And here in Malaysia, they are not allowed to work legally, although they do work, at their own expense, because they could be subject to harassments by law enforcement officers, and some of them even ended up in detention or even deportation. It happens time and time again. And also they are not able to access medical care, and their children are not able to go to school. And some of these children actually fall into the hand of illegal criminal syndicates, having to back on the street, Rohingya kids having to back on the streets and all that. So it's like, although they sort of find a safe haven in Malaysia away from military persecution and war and conflicts in their home country, but in Malaysia the situation is actually not much better in the sense that they are not allowed to work, to go to school and also to seek medical care. Right.
I want to take it now to the bigger picture here. 52% of refugees come from 3 countries. The largest groups come from Syria, then Afghanistan, and most recently from Ukraine, with nearly 6 million people displaced due to Russia's invasion. And so, who are the host nations with the largest refugee population? Turkey and Iran both have 3.4 million refugees within their borders. They're followed by Germany, Colombia, and finally Pakistan. Chunyuan, I want to take this to you now and talk about the Ukrainian refugees, which is kind of new now to the composition of refugees from the past. As we said, Ukrainians make up the 3rd largest contingent of refugees. You were in Europe when Russia invaded their country. Tell us about how they have been received by their host countries and how they came across to you when they left their home countries to start their new uncertain lives.
So I was working as a supported housing officer for refugees when the war started. But in the UK, they have different programs for Ukrainian refugees. They have Homes for Ukraine. So usually Ukrainian refugees, they have a different refugee asylum path than other refugees that I actually supported. But because of the Homes for Ukraine program, I do hear a little bit of what their lives were like after arriving in the UK. So they were moved into a host family's house. I've heard from one host that even though they arrived in the UK, which is like a safer place, but they still have a lot of trauma they have to heal, they have to deal with. I've heard that some of them couldn't live near airports because if they hear the flights take off or landing, those sort of sounds are easily trigger their traumatic past experiences. So I would say it is difficult for them to just arrive in a new place and start integrated. They have to still find the time and space for them to heal, and then for them to think about, like Josh said, not only to survive, but also how to thrive in an alien place.
And going back to that chart there, Afghans are also among the largest in numbers of refugees. Farishta Afzali is a refugee rights advocate from Afghanistan and was a refugee herself. She spoke to us from the US about her community's ongoing trauma and ordeal.
So there has been 3 main waves of migration from Afghanistan to neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan and Iran and Turkey and some other countries. And the main reason for fleeing Afghanistan was civil war in Afghanistan. I would like to particularly shed light on the Hazaras, which is one of the ethnic groups in Afghanistan, and they make approximately 20% of the population. And I'm also a Hazara girl, and they have particularly faced persecution. They have to leave everything behind and start life from scratch in Pakistan and Iran, just to support their children for a better life and for security. And particularly for Hazaras, as I mentioned, they have faced discrimination, systematic killings, and forced displacement in Afghanistan. And of course, for them, there was no any other options left.
So, no any other options left, she says. Chunyuan, can you explain to us what it is that compels someone to leave their home, leave their loved ones, and the situation they leave behind?
It's difficult because usually it's when it's way too difficult to stay, and that's why people leave. A lot of refugees are supported by children. They are unaccompanied minors. So some of them are actually told by their parents it's too dangerous for them to leave. They do not know quite very well exactly why. A lot of times they were told by their parents that they have to go, or they just arrive in a neighboring country, but it's too difficult for them to stay. They just decided to continue their journey and to eventually find a place for them to be able to start a new life.
Actually, nobody wants to leave home voluntarily. If not, I mean, these people, refugees, asylum seekers, are actually forced to leave because of war, because of political persecution, religious persecution, and all that. The Hazara Afghan lady just now, sorry, I didn't quite catch her name, mentioned about the plight of the Hazara people, which I can very much relate to, because Hazara is a Shiite community, Muslim community, as compared to Sunni, which is the majority population within the Islamic world. And Malaysia is a Sunni majority Islamic country. And there's this lack of understanding of the Shia Muslims within the Sunni Muslim community in Malaysia. So that's why they were very afraid of telling others that, we Hazara are actually Shia Muslim. So you can see that they are actually doubly punished. They already face persecution back in Afghanistan because of their ethnicity, because of their Shia Islamic background. And here in Malaysia, and so to some extent in Indonesia, the two major Muslim, Sunni Muslim countries in Southeast Asia, they again have to hide their identity, religious identity from others, just to avoid trouble, just to avoid further discrimination or stigmatization.
So it seems that just leaving their country is just the beginning of yet another ordeal. Chunyuan, I want to go back to the ways refugees can leave their countries, and often they're very, very risky, involving human traffickers. Can you shed some light on the dangers they face just to seek safety?
Yeah, I have heard a lot of very horrific stories where they start their engagement with human traffickers and they're put in very vulnerable positions. Sometimes they will ask for more money, they will ask for ransoms, they will say that I'm going to threaten your family. And this even continues after they arrive in the new country, because now they are involved in this. They were asked to become a money mule, they were asked to do something that's not legal, but they were also put in a very difficult situation. They get detained. All this kind of horror stories when they start their engagement with human traffickers.
And Josh, tell us about the role of human traffickers in this and how then they again are at risk, these refugees. They've left a very dangerous situation and they've just gone into one that could even be more dangerous.
Indeed, especially the Rohingya refugees in Malaysia, many of them actually went through horror before they arrived in Malaysia. They were subject to persecution and torture at the hands of human traffickers who constantly forced them to make payments before they were allowed to actually enter Malaysia. If you know the situation in Malaysia and Thailand quite well, like back in 2015, there was this mass grave that was uncovered by the Thai authorities and also the Malaysian police. Hundreds of up to 150 dead bodies were found there, and most of them belong to these Rohingya refugees. And before they left either Bangladesh, the camps in Bangladesh, or before they left Rakhine State in Myanmar, they had no idea about the torturous journey that they were actually embarked on. So while they are on the boat, they were tortured, they were beaten, and many women were raped, and those who were sick were thrown into the sea and all that. So many of these refugees, Rohingya refugees, actually had witnessed all these horrors before they arrived in Malaysia. So we can imagine the kind of traumas they actually went through, and in Malaysia, the fact that they are not able to access psychological assistance and all that actually worsen their psychological, their state of mind, and also their psychology. Yeah,
it's really heartbreaking, and what's really as troubling, if not more, in some cases, governments can be complicit in using refugees as pawns. Last year, Belarus, led by Alexander Lukashenko, began using migrants as a political weapon against the European Union. People from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria who had flown to Belarus were brought to the border and were forced to cross illegally into Poland. Marcin Iszewski from the European Values Center for Security Policy explains.
Poland, similarly to Lithuania and Latvia, the other two countries that border Belarus, has seen an influx of irregular migrants coming into the country through the border with Belarus. And it has been suspected that the influx of these individuals, coming particularly from the Middle East, was a part of grey zone operations of the Lukashenko regime against European Union member states. However, the treatment of these migrants by the Polish authorities has been quite abysmal. Poland militarized the border, having deployed over 15,000 troops to the border, and also having allocated almost 1.5 billion euros to the construction of a tall border wall on the border between Poland and Belarus. Additionally, Polish authorities were heavily criticized for illegal pushbacks of individuals who were intending to seek asylum status in Poland after crossing the border.
So many countries are signatories to conventions for refugees and for the safeties of refugees, but why are so many of these refugees still being treated by criminals by the government system itself?
I think law enforcement agencies in many of the countries do not have a clear understanding of who is a migrant, who is a refugee. For example, we take the case of the UK as an example. The Rwanda plan, something that everybody is familiar with if you follow the refugee news and all that. And the plan was actually devised to stop migrants from coming into the UK through the English channels. However, we all know that most of these people actually hail from countries beset with hosts of military conflicts or persecution and all that. So they do rightfully deserve international protection. The Rwanda plan was actually meant to stop these people from coming into England because to the UK because the authorities see them as illegal migrants and not as refugees, and also due to the fact that many of the public services in the UK have deteriorated over the years due to the financial crisis, due to the COVID pandemic and all that. NHS hospitals are basically running out of beds and all that. So all these, the overstretching of the public resources actually gave rise to kind of right-wing rhetoric, often used employed by politicians to actually confuse the public over the refugee issues. So the general public do tend not to have a proper understanding of refugee protection.
Yeah, and it's really disheartening. Somewhere like the United Kingdom, which definitely did not have a perfect system, but at least had a system where refugees did have a chance, is now looking at this option. So my question, the same question to you, Chunyuan, on do you see that systems are failing refugees, particularly at a governmental level, in recognizing what they can contribute to society?
The system is really, really stretched. Like I've worked in one, so I do know like how many resources are there, and they're really not a lot of, for example, spaces in the systems. They're really stretched. So I can understand that. The people are asking, we cannot host every single refugees. But at the same time, that I would say that there is also a need to think about different creative ways to think about asylum in a different ways. So there are other like avenues to be explored, like for example, whether or not community sponsorship is a way to alleviate some of the government's or like institutional stress pressure. Would that be the one to explore, or would they be like other humanitarian support systems, humanitarian protections, different migration routes? Would that be the way to support? I feel like a lot of times if we only fixate on let's say a specific program or a specific way of providing asylums, we can only see the constraints. But like I feel like there needs to be kind of expanded and think about humanitarian protection at large, and what else that we could, what kind of resources we could leverage for this issue.
I'm really glad you brought that up. Before we go, we're going to hear again from Farishta Afzali, who's a human rights advocate from Afghanistan, again on why we need to see refugees as people who can contribute and strengthen societies.
But let's also, shift our mentality towards seeing the potentials and capacities these refugees offer to the host country. Like for most of them, like back in their home countries, like they were engineers, they were scientists, they were writers, they were journalists, they were like bright students, like from different fields. But right now, coming to the host country, maybe a barrier for them is the language. So let's not underestimate like the capabilities that they have. Let's not underestimate what they can offer to that country or to that new community.
And with that, we end the show, but not before we say a huge goodbye to our guests, Chunyuan Hu in Taipei and Josh Hong in Kuala Lumpur. Thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And to our audience at home, it's been great to have your company. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.